Well, I'd like to welcome everybody to Good Ideas from your pals at iDiz Incorporated. My name is Brian Ringer. I call myself a wordsmith and big idea guy at iDiz Incorporated. And at Good Ideas, we're starting from the idea that credit unions do a lot of good in the world. And they're also a strong and sustainable business model. So we're exploring the good ideas, both inside and outside the credit union world, that can do a lot of good while also being good business. Um, Today, I have the privilege of speaking with, I guess I'd call him a strategy guru, Rich Jones. Rich's consultancy is leading to number two leadership.com. And he works with community credit unions or community banks and credit unions all over the country on high level strategic planning, leadership development, branding, and probably a lot more that I'm leaving out. Um, Hello, Rich. Thanks for your time. Thanks for being here with me to try out this new idea.
Well, thanks for having me, Brian. And I should say that, in hindsight, I should have used you guys to come up with my name and my URL, because leading to leadership is quite awkward when you say.
Yeah, and all the good .coms are taken, so that can be hard to. Yeah, there's a certain point. Well, you've got some brand equity in that, so just keep going. But
That's right.
yeah, so something about guru could be in there. I don't know. But one thing is, like, Rich and I are both pretty active bloggers, in addition to, in credit unions and credit union strategy and marketing and so forth. And we've kind of noticed some convergence of idea recently, and we've really had some really great discussions behind the scenes. And one of the topics that we've gotten really interested in, and Rich has some really good articles recently on that you should go look at, is data, the importance of data to credit unions and the importance of getting good, clean data and making it a strategic imperative for the credit unions. That's a huge topic. And one of the things I think we'll talk about today is it could be called data hygiene or data integrity, because that's something, no matter where you are in that journey, whether you have a CDO, chief data officer, and a whole department that serves everybody else in the whole organization, or whether you're just trying to figure out why all your email addresses are junk. Wherever you are, you can kind of figure out, you can get started with at least get good, clean data in your system so you can grow in that direction. And kind of my first question, Rich, was in this whole conversation is, I know what you're going to say, and I'm going to ask it anyway. How important is data to credit unions and community banks?
Well, finance has known data as being a critical element of their job since the beginning of credit unions, or the beginning of financial services for that matter, because finance relies on data to kind of make sure that, cash in, cash out is all coming to a balance point. But their view of data is pretty much around the financial relevance of the data. But data becomes increasingly critical for people like in lending, or people like in mortgage services, or people like in marketing. And the reason it's so critical is because you can create significant efficiencies in the organization if you really understand what the data is telling you about how your organization is operating. In marketing that, if you have a bad list, it doesn't matter how good your offer is or how good your collateral is, your creative. If the list is bad, it's not going to deliver anything. So how do you get the right list out of that data set, whether it's from core or your loan origination system or wherever that data exists? How do you get it out so it actually is telling you a story, and begins answering questions that you have, like, who is a good prospect for a deposit? That seems like a simple question, but data can kind of narrow that list down from the universe of your membership down to the critical few that are truly prospects for a deposit or account.
Yeah. And what I kind of like, And I think this is something, especially because, everybody's heard the phrase big data and so forth. And now it's one of those things, it's been in the marketing world for a long time, but now it seems to be getting more attention. It's almost everything old is new again, is what the way I look at it. I worked with one of the first MCIFs in the country a long time ago, an embarrassingly long time ago. And and it was remarkably effective, even as crude as it was, where we had monthly dumps and big tapes, and we had endless arguments over what the word account means. Um, so it's kind of coming to the forefront now that we've got processing power, and now that people are using that for growth. I mean, getting a handle on this and getting it right and getting good, clean data that you can use to make decisions, especially marketing decisions, growth decisions, I would say it's almost existential. Like, you need to be getting a handle on this. And I mean, is that something, that it needs to happen? You can't just fly by the seat of your pants for much longer.
Right, right. If you look at a credit union today, there's typically four data realities, and only one of them
I like that concept.
probably is truthful. The first data reality is, what is the data saying? That may or may not be truthful, depending on a few things that we can get into. The second one is, what do I want the data to tell me? The third is, how can I manipulate the data to tell the story I want told? And the fourth is, what does the raw data out of a third-party software tell me that may not even be relative to what your core is telling you, because they don't talk the same language. They use different labels for the same data objects. So you've got four data stories. And if we are going to look at data as one of the credit union's most valuable assets, which it should be and considered to be, then we really need to find out what the truth around data is. And we need to get to that, and to use another kind of almost trite phrase, we need to get to that one source of truth. What are the facts? Not the facts as I manipulated them, not the facts as I wish they were, but the facts as they truly are. How do we get to that point? And I think that's a critical piece that every credit union needs to strive to get to. And I'm not here to say that that's an easy journey, because it isn't. A typical credit union of 500 million in assets, let's say, just to pull a number out of the hat, is going to have 40 or more data sources. How do you get all those data sources that have a different label for the same object to kind of connect together to tell a unified story about your membership or about your process? And until you get there, you're not going to really have a clear understanding of that total picture of member. You're not going to have a total understanding of your process efficiency and effectiveness. So to me, it is a very critical step in the journey that credit unions need to take on. I was recently working with a large credit union on the East Coast, who will remain nameless, but one thing that they did that kind of threw me aback as we were putting together a data strategy was, they said, well, yeah, we kind of reconcile things as, if it doesn't balance, it's a timing error. So everything, everything was a timing error, which, yeah, okay, you can get away with that for a little while, but let's be honest. It's not always a timing error. There are three ways that data can be out of sync. One data set with another data set. One is definition. How did you define that object? For example, what is a member? Yeah. If
Yeah.
you go to a credit union, you probably experience this, Brian. You go to a credit union and ask three different departments what their member count is, you're going to get three different numbers, because they have their own parameters on that definition of member. So if you don't have the same definition, you're going to get different data sets. The second one is, what is what is the logic in the query? That equal to, greater than, less than, those logic points, when you're extracting data from a data set, are going to really dictate the quality of the data. And if you have somebody that is using a slightly different logic, regardless of how minor it seems like, you're going to get a different result when you run that report. And the third truly is timing. So there is some validity that timing, because, you know, look at your systems. If you've got 40 systems, they're all updating and appending to a central core system or whatever at different times. So if you run a report 1 hour later, it might tell a different story than what it told right now.
Mhm.
So if two people are running the same report and their timing is different, they're going to get different results. So how do you get all that put together so that there is, you know, the timing difference is mitigated, the query differences are mitigated, that logic inside the query, and the definitions that can be variables are mitigated. You know, I work with some credit unions and they consider a home equity loan or a home equity line as a consumer loan, whereas another credit union calls it
Mhm.
a mortgage loan. Well, if you're referring to it two different ways and you run a report on mortgage loans, you're going to get two different answers. So that the criticality of those three data rules are absolutely essential before you can come to a uniform data set that you can truly trust.
Yeah, I've seen another example, and we could probably tell war stories all day, but another example that is often overlooked and is that you can't always have live data, although that's kind of the ideal, I think. But if you're pulling at month end, you're going to have I've seen this happen where you have very odd numbers because
Mhm.
um, there's a large employer that pays that pays. I think they paid exempt employees twice a month, and they paid hourly employees every 2 weeks. And so you'd have these very odd fluctuations as direct deposits came in if you only pulled your date on the last day of the month
Mhm.
or the first day of the month.
Right.
You'd be like, you would not get the true picture of what the deposits are, what loan balances are, delinquencies. None of that made any sense until and the partial solution was to just kind of pick a random day where nobody was actually getting paid and everybody had a few days to. It was very, you got closer, but it was fuzzy,
Yeah.
but you got closer. But yeah, things like that.
Yeah.
Defining what constitutes a member. Is that
Mhm.
an account number? Is it a social security number? Or what if that social security number has two account numbers or more?
Right. And
Um,
is an account the same as a member? You
right?
know, that's
Uh,
another,
it never
that's
is.
always a big conversation that we get
Yeah,
into is that definition.
yeah, and then how do you define? I remember we had to define account as something that could that could have a balance,
Hmm.
because we first defined an account as something with a balance. And well, how come we're missing about 1,000 credit cards? Oh, those don't have a balance because they're zero.
Right. Right.
That shows you really have to be careful and thoughtful about these things and think about all the weird corner situations.
And
Uh,
there's a lot of confusion around that particular
mhm.
issue alone because the credit unions have a tendency to interchange the word service and account.
Yeah.
And so having a definition that differentiates those two elements, I think, is critically important. Like you said, an account should be anything that carries a balance or has the potential of carrying a balance.
Yeah.
A service is any tool or resource or application that allows you to access those balances in one way or another. It doesn't carry. So a lot of people call a debit card, for example, a product. A debit card, no, is more of a service. Now, it's an important service. I'll get you, but it is not truly a product. It is exclusively a service because the only thing a debit card can do is access a balance. That's all it's good for. So I think those two definitions are critically important to getting to some solution because a lot of credit unions have that measure as a goal of number of products per household. So clearly known what you're counting as a product is critically important to get accurate measurements around that particular, and that's an important measure. I mean, the more everybody
Mhm.
knows, the more products per household, the stickier the member is. The less likely they are to attrition to another financial institution. So it is an important measure, but let's measure the right things when we're doing that.
Yeah. And services per member was another one I've
Mhm.
seen. Again, everybody has a different definition of services and
Yeah.
so forth. So it's really, it can be, that can lead to some amazing controversies. And does it depend on how your credit union works, how your core works, if how your data software, um, whether that's an MCIF or whether you call it something else, CRM, whatever. um, that's that's kind of the criticality of those. um, the follow-up question to that: are there standard definitions? I know you were involved in COFX, which is creating standards and so forth. Are there some standard definitions that people can use to work with to kind of go through and clean these up without all the debate?
I don't think there are some. Typically, when we do data strategy work, we make some recommendations uh, on some standards. And for example, a member is a unique social security. That's, you know, you take away all that underlying garbage that some people use, like are they above par, are they below par, are they in collections? Strip that away. If they have a membership account, even though it's not funded right now, they are, and it's a unique social security, they are a member. So we do make some recommendations, but you come across some organizations. A really good example of that was uh, Bank Fund Staff Federal Credit Union out of Washington, D.C. They're the bank for the International Monetary Exchange and the World Bank. That's their field of membership exclusively. 60% of their members were alien to the United States. In other words, they did not have, 60% of their membership did not have a social security number. So that definition wouldn't work for them. We had to come up with a brand new definition for them.
Mm-hmm.
To define members. So there's some flexibility there. The critical point on definitions is that everybody from the CLO to the CFO to the CMO, the whole leadership table is an agreement on the definition. Another one that's always thrown into question is inactive member. What is an inactive member, right?
Yep.
Most credit unions define inactive as they're about ready to go into a sheet with the state. In other words, the money is about ready to go away and be possessed by the state if something doesn't happen. Well, that takes months and months and months to happen, right?
Yeah.
Is that really how you want to measure inactivity in your credit union? To me, if somebody hasn't used their debit card on their checking account for a month, there's a probability that that's an inactive account. How long have you gone without at least
Oh yeah.
doing something with your debit card in 30 days? I mean, the average consumer does like 20 some transactions a month. If you haven't done any, chances are that you are inactive or at risk of becoming inactive. So what should that definition be from an operational standpoint, not necessarily from a compliance or legal standpoint? So there are some variations there that I think are justified. And just like the example we used with home equity, I don't care whether you call it a mortgage loan or a consumer loan. The point is, everybody that's making decisions based upon data agrees to what it is, whether it's a mortgage loan or whether it's a consumer loan. So that agreement be at the leadership table, and then let that cascade down through the entire organization so that anybody that's reading a report knows exactly what they're reading and seeing.
Yeah. Yeah. And one follow-up to that is kind of a corollary to that is why it's important to work with guys, with people like you who've done this before and done this journey before, rather than, try to make it up on your first time through.
Right.
That's because there are gotchas like zero balance accounts, and then there's a whole raft of issues which we'll probably, about business accounts, so you got a member who has two businesses plus a whole raft of family accounts. you know this, you're going to need to you're going to really be interested in that person, but you're also going to have a lot of trouble defining her unless you really have some good processes and know the gotchas and so forth as you go through.
Right.
Yeah, that's
I think another lesson that we've learned, and we've been doing this for 8 years now, and we've done it for over 60 credit unions and most of them have been, we've done a few with the credit unions under $1 billion, some of them as low as 250 million, but most of them have been with $1 billion plus credit unions in asset size. And it's critically important that they kind of make data their number one priority in their strategic plan. Because, if you don't have good data, you're not going to be able to track your strategies well. And having worked with that many credit unions, we've seen I could tell you some interesting war stories that we've seen in the way data has been used, not to the benefit of the organization, but to the benefit, in some cases, of a strategic leader. It can get a little scary. So it is a critical point that we need to really take serious.
Yeah. Yeah, critical strategic plan. Well, and that kind of leads to, you had an interesting article you published in June, and on how smaller credit unions can build a data strategy. You'd mentioned that it's kind of the bigger credit unions with a lot more resources that are paying attention to this. And, how does a smaller credit union get started? We, there are a lot of credit unions in the middle, in that,
Right.
500 million and under. And, there's only so much time in the day and so many people and so many hands.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, you kind of talked about that a little bit in this article on LinkedIn and so forth. So what's a little bit about how that process can work, how you modify it to still get good value?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things is, you can get too much data. So you have to be very selective, especially with a credit union with limited resources, limited skill sets. It's critically important that they identify what are the most important data points that they really need to make sure are spot on. And I always tie that back to their strategic plan. What is it strategically you're trying to accomplish? For example, if your strategic plan says we want to grow to 50,000 members by 2026, in 5 years. Okay. Understanding member behavior becomes a critical data point. So where do we get the best understanding of member behavior? And so, you prioritize those data sources that hold a piece of that member story, and you make a list. Of course, core is always first because that has all your transaction and balance information. That's where it exists.
Yeah.
But then if one of your strategies is you want those members to be borrowing members, you're going to really want to have a good insight into your loan origination systems, whether it's mortgage loans or whether it's consumer loans, to understand what your members are doing and what are you capturing in that loan origination system that you can leverage for better engagement. You know, you look at a mortgage loan origination system or a consumer loan origination system. Most of them, there are two different systems in most credit unions.
Yeah.
You have balances held elsewhere. You have average income. You have a wealth of information in there that if you can get your hands around that, you can use that as a learning tool to understand who else in your community looks like this member that potentially has these kinds of balances at Wells Fargo, potentially has these kind of loans at Nissan Credit Corp. Who else? And you can do some lookalike marketing just by understanding who your best members are, and more importantly, who are your new members and why are they coming to you? So then you have to look at I would look at the origination system. What are you learning about that new member in that new member application? And hopefully it's online. and how can you extract that information so that you can actually learn, you know, where they're from, what is their demographic, you know, what is their psychographic, you know, what about them can we look for other people like them out in the community for, and start to market to them. So I start there. I start with a strategic plan, and I look at those key elements of what are giving you the data points that's going to help you drive that strategic plan forward, and then prioritize those and make that list, and then figure out, okay, how are we going to get that information into a centralized warehouse of some kind, whether it's an MRM or a CRM. It doesn't matter, but all of that has to be centralized so that it's easily accessible and you can take insights out of it. You can ask it questions and get answers to those questions. So to me, that's for a smaller credit union, that's where you start. And you know, it's just like marketing. You know, I once had a VP of lending that said, well, you know, how come we're only sending out 2,000 offers for a car loan? We got 30,000 members. And I said, well, not all 30,000 are prospects. I'm just saying, more is not better. And the same with data. More data is not better, but the data you have has to be right.
Yeah. You know, and I've really found that applies, like focus on what's important. That really applies to whether you're talking about website analytics or whether you're talking about, you know, whatever. You focus on some of the things that are important, and you can start getting a lot of value pretty quickly by getting that figured out. One of the things,
I think the key point there is anchor whatever you're doing with data, anchor it in your strategic plan. Make sure that whatever you want from data, it's a tool to help you attain those strategic objectives, whatever they are.
Yeah, and that's anchor it to that, and then pick, you know, start with what's most important and work your way down the list. Just, you know, another war story, why not? We long ago, not so far away, we found out we had a problem with our data on how members qualified for membership. We, you know, what they're eligible, because we wanted to figure out how many came in through this employer, how many came in through this one, so we can kind of figure out where's the most valuable place to, you know, a lot of decisions, where's the most valuable place to put a branch, where's the most, you know, things like that. And we had like 30 segs at the time, and we had something over 4,000 different variations on how that was recorded. The most popular variation on recording eligibility was nothing. They just didn't do it. Didn't capture that. So yeah, it was one of those things. So we had to we had to first make the decision, how important is this? And it's like, yeah, this is pretty important. And we're never gonna get this to 100%, but we'll get it as good as we can. So we did spend some, we did some automated things. If it had the keyword in there, we would just automatically assign it this, that, and the other. And then, but that was important. Led us to do some surprising insights. Um, and there were some things that were just kind of lost forever because it was never really was captured. Um, and you really don't have anything to make a good guess on. We don't know
Right,
how this
right.
this person, they showed up, they're a member, they've been great. We just don't know how they got here.
Yeah,
Just,
right.
and that kind of one of my related questions was, and something you touched on is, for example, in loan origination systems, um, especially in 2020, we saw a lot of our credit union clients switch systems because they worked better online, or they worked on mobile devices better, because they interfaced with the core better, things like that. One of the reasons we didn't see, and I really think we should see, is, and we've had complaints about this, is we're not getting data back out of this loan origination
Mhm.
system that we should be, or it's bad data. We don't know how many forms were abandoned. That's a
Yeah,
basic
right.
core stat. People go in, and you know 20 people a day go in, 5 apps drop out. What happened to them? What stage did they drop
Mhm.
out at? That's an important metric.
Right.
That's more website based, but um
Well, but that's driven by data. I mean, if you
yeah.
have, if you know clearly on that loan origination system that the milestones of that application,
Hmm.
all the steps they go through from initiating it all the way through funding, and you can put service level agreements inside of that saying if
Yeah.
this doesn't happen by this amount of time, then I want an alert. Then you can almost, not necessarily, and it's not necessary that it be, but it can be almost real time. You can determine where there is a dysfunction in your process, whether it's the process that you adopted from a third party, or the way you've customized the process to for some maybe legal compliance regulatory issue that may be real or imagined. But those data points are absolutely critical, especially in that loan origination. And it is even more critical in mortgage
Oh yeah.
processing. You know, Rocket Mortgage isn't that much different than the average credit union mortgage department. The only difference is they change the expectation of the consumer. That if I go on my phone, I can just boom, 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 and I can get approved, that fast. Well, yeah, kind of. I mean, we know the
Kinda.
truth, but it's set an expectation. And if your particular system is clunky and asks for, uh, get a scan of your driver's license, or does all kinds of weird stuff, then you kind of are setting yourself up for failure. I mean, if
Hmm.
you go to Rocket Mortgage and when they ask for a driver's license, they let you take a picture of it with your phone
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
populate right now, right? And a lot of credit unions are now offering that service, but it changed the expectation. So, that whole point in really being able to understand the process as it exists, not as you think it exists, not as you thought you designed it to exist, but how is the experience with the member actually from get to go. And like you said, if consistently you say member after member or application after application dropping out at a particular point, you need to know that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You need to say, okay, what's happening here?
Yeah.
And find out what is that friction point that's causing them to lose interest or engagement right then. How do we
Yeah.
fix that point?
Yeah. Yeah. And from what we've been hearing, a lot of the common platforms don't yet offer that data. Like, they're asking these questions and
Mm-hmm.
just getting nothing out. And like you mentioned, that would need to be that's kind of the next frontier. I think that'll
Yeah.
be the next thing. I mean, Chase is doing this, they are. And,
Mhm.
Chase has all the data in the world, but,
Well,
that's
with,
going to need to be part of your
with
SLAs, it's going to be
yeah,
part of the expectations. We're going to get data about how the process is going, you know.
and credit unions, they see a new application, and they get all excited about it, be it a loan origination system or being a bill pay or an online banking. They get all excited about it, and data becomes an afterthought. If there's one thing that small credit unions can do, or any credit union for that matter, that would help their data journey 100%, is make data, the acquisition of data out of that resource, part of the original implementation process, and not say, okay, we're getting all these canned reports, but they're coming in PDF, or we got to go to this secure sign on. And how do we get that out so we can actually manipulate it so it makes sense to us and use it?
Yeah.
So, when you're going through a vendor search, yeah, look at all the cool tools and the functionality and all that stuff that you get excited about, but also make sure that data becomes that entry point of conversation that say, okay, you're telling me you got all these reports. I want to make sure that all those reports get dumped into this place, and I don't have to go out and spend thousands of
Hmm.
dollars a year just to access my own data. I don't want to have to pay for professional services to access my data. A lot of these systems, core systems all the way through, feel that data is their data. They don't really see it as the credit union's data. So you got to make that. It's easy to get those kind of things done when they're negotiating to sell you.
Yeah.
It's much more costly and complicated to get those things done after you've implemented.
Yeah. Yeah. And the same principles apply. You have to make sure you have the same definitions. You
Mhm.
have to make sure what do you do if it's a new member? What do you do if it's an existing member? What do you do if Dave and David are the same person, or maybe
Yeah.
they're not? That kind of thing. Um, yeah, and it's kind of one of those things. For first it was let's get it online, and then it was let's get it mobile. Let's make sure it's accessible. That's a big concern, accessibility and so forth. But yeah, data has not had enough importance yet, and
Right.
it should be the primary. Like we need more. We need to make sure that information, we're not just getting whatever drops out the other end. We're getting vision into the process.
Right. And
Um,
I'm not knocking salespeople, but I've been through a lot of these vendor presentations, and they do a really good job saying, okay, and here are all the canned reports, and it's going to tell you everything you need to know, and they just kind of pass over that, and that's the end of that conversation. That needs to become, when I'm working with a credit union that has the resources and the skill sets to do this, I actually recommend that on every new implementation of any software, that the data person, whoever that is at the table for the sales and the integration conversations of that new application, so that
mhm.
that person can have an eye on the prize. And that prize is, okay, what are we learning from this member in the data inside of this system? That we have to know.
Okay, here's a loaded question for you. You talked about that data person, and again, I think at a larger credit union, or where we're headed is that's going to be a core function, a C-level
Mhm.
function, maybe even you have a CDO or whatever you call them. Um, back in the world, like, does data belong to IT? A lot of people think it does, or does data belong to marketing?
Uh,
It's computers, right?
yeah, that's what they argue about all the time, right?
Yeah. Who owns that? Yeah.
Well, and the third element is, does it belong to IT?
Yeah.
Right? Because IT is doing all the integrations and the one that has to do all the transporting data in and out. So you have three stakeholders that really want to own the data. And you know, that they're, what we look for in data leadership in a credit union is, number one, we want a strategic leader. And this, it doesn't matter whether this person works in is the CFO or we've seen the CIO and the CTO and the CMO. We've even seen the chief lending officer as the strategic leader around data. And the reason why we pick that person is because, number one, they have a holistic understanding of the business, not just a siloed understanding of the business, but they understand generally the business as a whole. They understand kind of the driving forces of lending and mortgages and finance. They're not experts, but they understand it enough. And the second thing is that they have a passion for data. Data is, you know, every credit union has somebody that really likes data, really likes to get their hands in and manage the data and wants to see reports and understand reports. And they have to have that passion. But the strategic leader doesn't do a whole lot tactically with data. Their job is to make sure that data projects are being funded and data resources are being allocated. That really is their job. And then there's a tactical leader. And typically we see this at maybe a director, sometimes the VP level. And this is somebody who clearly owns data for the organization. And it becomes a subset. It could be a subset of the marketing person, or it could be a subset of the finance person. That doesn't matter. But in that role, they act a lot like, as well, a good analogy would be they act like IT. IT, you know, has their own business unit, but they serve the entire organization. And like HR has its own business, but they serve the entire organization. In that role of data, their job is to serve the entire organization. And so what they want to do is they want to make sure that the APIs are being built, the extracts are being done, so that each of those business units are getting the data they need to actually be better at running their business. That's the job. And it doesn't have to be a separate one. Now, if you're in a $2 billion credit union, then lots of times we recommend a business intelligence unit.
Oh, okay.
And they own data, and they serve the whole organization. And there might be a business intelligence officer, but there's always that tactical role of people that are making sure the APIs are getting done, the extracts are standardized. And the third element on that is the data governance thing. It's kind of where we started here a little bit, to make sure that data, before it is taken in and begin to get used, has gone through a process of cleansing and normalization. Cleansing is to make sure that the data is accurate, that when it's coming out of that third-party system or out of the core. The other element of that though is that it has to be normalized, and that is taking all those labels like account, member, you know, that can kind of cross over each other, kind of getting all those into sync, so that regardless of what this system calls it, when it goes into this system or into this report, it means the same thing as what you defined it to mean. It doesn't matter what they call it anymore. It's now that element. If they call a member an account, when it goes into this report, it's now called a member. So that normalization of data is absolutely critical. And you know, those are two key points of the data governance thing. So the kind of the hierarchy is, you've got the strategic leader, and that could be it doesn't matter. It's just an adjunct to what their normal job is. Then you got the tactical leader. That can either be somebody who is assigned to really take care of the data, or it can be a subset of their job. And then you've got data governance, and data governance is best done with a committee of the key stakeholders. So if you look at the key stakeholders of data, you have marketing, lending, mortgages, branches, operations, finance. There may be a couple more in there, but those 6 absolutely are stakeholders in the data. And they're the ones that need to get together to make sure that those translations, that normalization is taking place, and that the data that they're seeing is clean. I don't know about you, Brian, but I remember when we first started using data at Elevations Credit Union way back in the dark ages, before there was any, where people were talking data lakes and data warehouses and you know,
Yeah.
AI and all this stuff, you know, way back in the day, you know, if you're that business unit owner, there are 9 times out of 10 when you can look at a report and say, huh, this doesn't look right, without, you know, without doing a deep dive. And so that's why you want them in there. When they see a report, they're the ones that are going to know, does this look like it's maybe close to the truth? Is it directionally accurate enough that we can make decisions on it? Those kinds of decisions. So that data governance. And what we found is the person leading that team is whoever it is that's you know, kind of making sure that the APIs and all of that work, that technical work of getting data is actually in charge of that, schedules those meetings, puts out the agenda, and has those conversations and negotiates sometimes those differences. So it's a key role.
Yeah, and it is more often than I think people realize until they've been hip deep in it. It is often a process of negotiation and really figuring out what something means and understanding how slippery sometimes that can be.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a key function, and somebody has to cut the knot and sometimes and
Yeah.
and make it happen, you know.
Yeah. And sometimes you have to call in that strategic leader and say, we're kind of in an impasse. Can you make a decision for us?
There you go. Yeah. Sometimes you need a hand with it.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. Okay. Yeah. And also, everything you described is not exclusive to large credit unions.
No.
You've talked about ways to scale that whole process up and down. So that's something I wanted to be real clear about is it's one of those things, once you make it a priority at any size, you can make steps and make improvements and you'll start seeing benefits from that.
And, you know, and credit unions, smaller credit unions, typically they'll have like their core vendor, and usually they won't have a lot of, they'll have a lot of third parties, but they're all some way, you know, either owned by or already have a significant relationship with their core vendor. And but what they have to understand is, even though that loan origination system is owned by your core, it's an acquisition they made 5 years ago, the data isn't always integrated. So it doesn't matter, you know, where you got that particular application or software. Chances are that there is an integration issue, there's a data governance issue, there is a data normalization issue that has to be dealt with if that data is going to translate so that you can use it organizationally.
Yeah. It honestly can be learning to have awkward conversations. It can be, why is it this way? Oh my, you know, and in their minds are like, oh my gosh, we've got 100 credit unions using this and no one's asked that before.
Right.
You know,
right.
it's almost, you know, it's almost it's in a lot of ways, it can be a new frontier and it can be kind of a new advantage that's available up and down the scale. It's, you know, to start really digging into this and understanding what your members are doing and how to attract more members, how to get them to do more business with you, that kind of thing. So,
well, the whole benefit of really getting your data clean, getting it right, is that you can move those conversations, especially around strategy and around operations and around planning. You can move it away from, I think, to, well, here are all the indicators the data tells us. So how do we want to respond to those indicators? You know, that's how you want to shift the conversation, because right now, you know, a lot of it is, well, I think we should do X. Well, okay, so why do you think that? You know, let's find out. Is we should buy this new application. Well, why do you think that? Is there a demand for it from the membership? If not, maybe we don't need to buy it now. We can't be Jobs, Stephen Jobs. We can't go out and build something anticipating that the member is going to buy it. We pretty much have to, you know, the average credit union pretty much has to say, before I invest this money and this resource into this, I want to make sure there's an appetite for it.
Yeah.
It's not, you know, innovation's great, but we can't be innovators like Stephen Jobs. It's not in our DNA.
Yeah, I think there's a quote from Henry Ford that said if he had asked people what they wanted, they would have said, "I just want a faster horse."
Yeah,
and
right.
it's a little bit like that. But yeah, it can also it can be a real driver of innovation and priorities, and also feeding back into the strategic mission, strategic imperatives of the credit union, and which feed back into the mission. You can do more good for more people, the
Yeah.
better your business runs. It's
Oh,
not
yeah.
it's not making decisions without soul. It's informing the soul that makes the decisions. So that's a very, people are like, oh, we don't want to automatically. Well, no, you're still making the decisions based on your imperatives. But and based on your based on your brand and your mission and so forth. But now you have even better information on it. Okay.
Right.
Well, I think, yeah, it's about, we're just about out of time here. We covered a lot of territory, probably more than I intended, but that's cool.
Well, I'm a kind of a stream of consciousness guy, Brian.
Yeah. That's the fun thing about a conversation with Rich Jones. You never know. But I think it, like I said, I think one of the things I really have taken away that I didn't quite realize was this is available. This is accessible. This is something anybody at any size credit union, any size community bank can start getting a handle on and so forth. Obviously you need to get leadership on board at any level, but it's something you can start with and start getting value from really quickly, I think. And Rich,
and the way to realize that is just if you start seeing those conversations that are asking about why is it that way, then it's telling you that you probably need to fix it.
Yeah.
That's I think a key point.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this is kind of a way forward through that impasse and so forth. Okay. And yeah, and Rich, I really can't thank you enough for your time today. And it's really been fun. I know we've been talking about data. Sounds like a geeky topic, but I've had a heck of a good time. And we could probably talk about war stories all night here, but and also if anybody's listening, I wanted to, Rich, you can contact him through leading2leadership.com and read his blog and get some good ideas. And you're also active on LinkedIn and other social media if people want to get to know you. And also our blog, we're mostly on credit union marketing, credit union websites and so forth, is at cuidiz.com, cuidiz.com. And our shared ideas blog has a lot more on this and many, many other topics over the years. Rich, again, thank you very much for your time, and hope we can. And thanks for letting us start Good Ideas with a bang, with with your presence here. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks a lot for having me, Brian, and make the rest of your week fantastic.
All right, you too. Appreciate it.
All right.